life is full of a journey. And if your success is measured and only defined once, as you change and grow, you're not going to be able to meet that ideal that you've set forth for yourself.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we feature top leaders on how they measure success in their business and life. Now, let's learn from their experiences.
Carl J. Cox here. I'm the host of the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Today, this episode is brought to you by 40 Strategy. 40 Strategy is built to make strategy work for small to medium-sized businesses and organizations. We do this by helping design great strategic plans, but more importantly, help those organizations be accountable so that they actually get there. To learn more, go to 40strategy.com. We also have had our book come out not too long ago, Lost at CEO. Recommend you go out to there. You can find it on Amazon.com, Audible.com, or BarnesandNoble.com. Also encourage you, if you'd like, as we can actually get you a free signed copy. If you'd like a free signed copy, tell them you've been listening to our podcast. Send me an email directly to carljcox@40strategy.com. Often, time to time, we have shout-outs, and this shout-out goes to Marcus Ogden. Marcus, thank you so much to introducing us to our guest today. And Marcus is an unbelievable person. He does a great job, and he also has a wonderful podcast called Get Authentic. I encourage you to go out and listen to his today. And from that, we have our guest, Olivia Atkin. Olivia is leading her business empire, achieving success. Olivia has crafted a multifaceted platform that empowers others to reach their full potential. At the heart of her endeavors lies her book, Achieving Success in Career Development, where she imparts invaluable wisdom to aspiring individuals. She further amplifies her message through her podcast, Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin, reaching a global audience eager for motivation and growth. Olivia, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed it. We often, for those who are listening, we do typically, nearly all of our guests, we do a prep interview just to make sure you got great information, you have a great history. And I was listening to Olivia, and honestly, I come into these with like, okay, I don't want to talk with them. So I'm trying to like talk myself out of talking to our referrals or guests. And then Olivia just kept on going. He's like, how did you do that? How did you do that? And so it was just a really inspiring story. I think you are going to be inspired by a story today. So Olivia, let's just start with our core. Tell us about your business today and how are you helping people out?
So my business, Achieving Success LLC, really aims to help people through any of our divisions of achieving what success means and looks like to them today, both personally and professionally, and understanding that life is full of a journey. And if your success is measured and only defined once, as you change and grow, you're not going to be able to meet that ideal that you've set forth for yourself. So how can you continue to pivot your success goals, right? As we grow as humans, as we grow personally, how can you pay that forward to help others achieve their goals? So whether it's through the podcast or speaking or doing consulting, whether it's in the form of personal development or in the realm of all knowledge on podcasting, it's really about how do you define success? How can you pay it forward? And how can we build upon that to really grow ourselves?
So I'm curious from your perspective, when you are talking with the new client, how do you start with them? How do you help them go, okay, here's where you're at today. This is what we're going to do to help you get to your next destination location, that's going to get them to a better place.
So it depends on what we're talking about. So if I have a individual who wants to get into the podcasting space, it's, okay, what do you know about podcasting already? What are your goals within podcasting? Is it to be a host? Is it to be a guest on the host? What are the types of conversations? Let's dig into your why first and your purpose by doing this. And that is where I start with my podcast, whether it's helping individuals start their own podcast, getting people on podcasts, growing their podcast. That's the core center of where we start. When it comes to an individual who's looking to grow professionally and have professional development, it's a similar conversation. Where do you think you are now? Where do you want to grow? What are things you have thought about previously? And what drives you in your current role? And then we go from there. When it's a business owner who is trying to maybe elevate their team or elevate themselves in the growth of their business, it's very similar to the personal development of one individual. What do you have going on today? What are your short-term goals? What is life throwing at you too? Because especially as a business owner, it's important to know what's going on both personally and professionally because you have to plan for those things.
Now, Olivia, what you're getting is great advice. It's interesting, giving great advice. We ourselves, here this is probably our 160th ish, podcast that's being recorded here. And what's so fascinating about it is even ourselves, after doing so many, just this morning, literally before I was recording this, it's like, okay, who exactly do we want to be connecting with? I was refreshing ourselves and who are we trying to impact? Who is our target audience? And so as we go in the future, it will help us think of different questions to ask. It'll help us think about what type of guest to bring in, where to promote it, right? It helps provide the whole direction around the podcast, the purpose of the podcast, the value of the podcast. And here we are, we're halfway in. So it's interesting about this process. This isn't just something you have to do when you just get started, right? It's something you could do anytime, where you are, whether it be personal development or something longer or your podcast, right? Is to reframe once again, where are we at today and where do we want to go, right? It's such an important part of defining that, where you want to go. So after you get to that part of, okay, you got them figured out, they know where they want to go. They're crushing at this point. Or let me clarify, they know where they want to go. What do you find is often your client's next biggest challenge?
So whether it is in podcasting, and I see this a lot in podcasting, and you kind of just brought it up, so we'll start there, is the unknown. I see a lot of podcast hosts who come to me who I'm like, we got to start with a podcast audit if you already have your podcast, because I can tell by talking to them and their direction, they didn't set it up with strategy, or they haven't continued to think about their strategy and vision and continuously asking themselves that. So we'll start out with a podcast audit or consulting calls, trying to figure out, okay, what is your strategy? Are you doing everything the best you can? Because the other part of that, whether you're doing a podcast or you're doing a business, if you aren't continuously asking yourself, the question is, am I growing with this? Am I meeting these goals that I've set up for myself? Then you can get lost in the day-to-day actions. What ends up happening is you inadvertently pivot so far left or so far right that it's hard to figure out where you wanted to go originally. So we start with that. When it comes to clients who own their own business, I really ask them, okay, after we figure out what their goals are and where they want to go, what is that time commitment look like? What are the things, like, let's write down every single step you have to do. Let's figure out how much time you can devote to this. What are those processes and procedures to get from A to B? And let's write them down. I see one thing I work with business owners a lot on is the fact that, especially as an entrepreneur, when you start a business and you're trying to get it to grow, you forget about taking the time to write those processes down. Then you've grown to a certain extent and now you're too busy. Well, if the people you've trained are making mistakes and you rely on them to train the people they've brought in, and those mistakes have been happening, down the line it could cost you a lot more than taking the time in the beginning. So what do those processes look like? How are we laying them out for the next people? What are those tasks, and so far?
No, and that itself is really brilliant advice of documenting how you're doing things and or how you should be doing things, right? And then following it. We have multiple people involved in producing our podcast, as an example. From the copywriting, getting it socially, getting the post out. We have a group that we help give swag to our guests. We have the actual producing the videos. We have it put out the podcast. I mean, there are multiple different pieces that are involved with this. And we're now in our third group, if you may. We've changed again in terms of people doing some of the back end, and it's been very helpful. And when we went this most recent process, we've documented it, so it's a little bit easier, right? It's a little bit more clear, so we can, if you may, now plug and play different people that are involved with it, so we can actually be more effectively. But when you don't do that, it's a bit of a mess and it's pretty stressful. And just for those, Olivia, I'm sure you have something, but what we found for ourselves is this is where like tools like ChatGPT is just amazing, because you can write it faster, right? It's always a little bit, I'm sure you can help out with this process with what you already have standardized, but there's some things you could just like get a lot faster, but then you have to tailor it, of course, to yourself. This is where people miss things. It's like, oh, I'm just going to print it off of ChatGPT. It's like, well, that's not what you're doing, right? Let's write down exactly what you're doing, how you need to do it, and then, of course, you're probably filling in the missing holes, often the production, for example, at a podcast that they don't even consider and think about.
Yeah, one of the things I know ChatGPT is becoming such a phenomenon that everyone wants to use, but it's actually something I tell people to stay away from when writing process and procedure, because ChatGPT is an AI system. It can only put out based on the information it knows. And when you write a process and procedure, as I call it, you got to write it for the dumbest person that you might ever account it for. I need to know, and I run through every process and I help create them, like you were mentioning, but I want it down to, if I have to turn on my computer, what button am I pressing? Once I turn on my computer, where do I have to navigate on the screen? What button? Because when you write it for someone who's never been in the role, and you write it so that they can go through every step, screenshots are important, things like that, and you write it down to like the very minimum, you don't need to be as reliant on that person to make sure they're the expert at knowing what they're doing, or that they're just going to be able to connect from turning on the screen, to go to this software system to start these steps. It all has to be written down, because then you're not spending as much time training. You're not spending as much time on the mistakes. You want to write it for someone who's never experienced what you're about to do. And that's why, too, it can be hard sometimes when people haven't written down processes in no matter what they're doing, or templates for emails or things like that, and then they have a standard to it, and then they bring someone else in who doesn't understand the why behind that standard, doesn't know what to do, and now little small things get mishapped, or they go, I didn't know I had to do this because it wasn't written in the process, because to you at this point, you've been doing it so long, it's common sense. It's like, okay, you would just know that, when in reality, someone stepping new into doing a task is not going to know that.
No, that's a brilliant, and it's interesting when you said that, we were talking through that. I was like looking, yeah, there was other pieces. It's like, okay, how do you set up the camera properly? How do you make sure the audio is properly set up? I have a template in front of me. Has that been updated for the speaker that I'm with that day, right? So once again, there's all of these details where I like it, and this is how it is for me today. It might appear to those on the outside I'm spending all my time with podcasting, but the reality is it's about an hour and a half a week for myself. I'm working with clients the vast majority of the time, right? And that's what I love to do, is being actually with clients and doing things. That's why I have this team in the background that'll help to do things. But if it's not, once again, properly detailed, we won't get it out 6 a.m. Pacific time every Tuesday morning. That is what we're striving for to get done. And we don't meet that standard, we know we haven't done our job, so to speak, right? And going through that. So that is, I love it, once again, how you go through those details. Let's go back to the personal side a bit. Well, let me clarify that statement. When you're working with people from their career perspective, let's go outside the podcast part, right? Because that's a scary thing, right? When people are thinking about going somewhere new, and we'll talk about, I do want to talk about your story a bit here coming up. Of your story is quite dynamic of how you got into what you're doing and doing today. But from your perspective, what is those really big bottlenecks on a personal level that holds somebody from jumping into a new endeavor?
Fear. I'm going to say that it was something I talk about regularly. It was actually part of my TEDx talk, and really the premise of the TEDx talk I've given, the title being called Defeating Your Biggest Enemy, You. how we can all get in our own ways during moments of opportunity or struggle. And it's so true. At the root of all things that end up making a decision for us, right, is fear. Because when sometimes we get scared to go to the next level, that unknown, and you decide not to make the decision, someone else is going to make the decision for me. We're going to go this, blah, blah. You're inadvertently making that decision. Whether you want to realize it or not making a decision is just as standing your ground as making that decision. And the other part of it is there can be so many ups and downs as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, that sometimes when we're in the thick of it and it's looking grayer and grayer, that fear starts to hold on to us, whether it's, okay, well, I haven't met my monetary goal this month or this quarter. Should we keep going? Like, am I doing this the right way? And then it's, okay, I need to bring in more people, but I'm fearful of letting go sometimes of that control. How am I going to be able to give up the control? This is my baby. So, at a lot of root things that end up hindering entrepreneurs and even leaders within organizations from growing themselves in that role is fear.
Absolutely. No, fear is, it's a key key challenge, right? And what's interesting, this fear part is something that even the best of the best, the top of the food chain, there's this belief that, oh no, nobody at the top, so to speak, has it. And the reality is they do. There's something called imposter syndrome, which often many people experience, right? It's like that and if for those I'm sure familiar with what it means, it sounds like what it is. We don't believe we should be where we feel like we're an imposter at our position of success. And so getting, once again, the confidence to move towards that, overcoming that fear and still moving forward. So for those you're like, oh, once I get to the spot, I'm going to remove my fear. That's not true, right? Every day we run into new fears, a different thing, because our brain wants us to freak us out, right? And go back to what's comfortable, in our normal things. And Olivia, so we're going to first want to talk about how you measure success in your business, but then I'm really excited to talk about, once again, how you got to where you are today. So today, how are you measuring success in your business with your clients or with your own business from a measurement perspective?
So there's two main ways I measure success. One of them goes both personally and professionally. The first one being, have I made an impact to someone in a positive way, whether I know it or not today? Whether it's opening a door for someone, sharing tips of knowledge, right? Doing this podcast with you, I've made that impact to your listeners. I might have gotten them to think or challenge their thinking a little bit. As long as I've made an impact in someone's life positively, at least once in the day, I've succeeded in my goals, right? It doesn't necessarily always look the same and it could come in different ways, but as long as I do it, I've then been successful. Also with the business, I continue to look at how I'm delivering, what am I delivering to my clients. Again, achieving success has multiple divisions. Am I giving a talk today? Or how many talks on what topics am I delivering this year? Are they the best they can be? Are there takeaways? One thing I do with my keynote speaking or talks that I give is I want to make sure during that conversation I've gotten you thinking and I've allowed you to leave the room with something you can be implementing right away. If we're talking about personal branding at a talk, have I walked you through steps on building your personal brand, and have we worked through it together where you leave the room and now you have this new idea of what your personal brand is going to be, and you've already started to implement it by writing it down and starting those few steps. When we talk about networking, right? How are we networking through the day? Are you paying it forward with your network? What are the things? And so I think with the business, it's not always about the monetary growth with it and how you should measure it, right? Though it is always important to measure, make sure you never want to go in the red, right? By just following your passion. But am I continuing to grow the business that best helps and feeds the client needs?
Yeah, what you're talking about there is once you deliver value, I think that's a long time ago, somebody shared with me, just add value, right? And when you add value, you should be ultimately helping your clients out from that concept, and then things will come to the bottom line as well, right? As a result of doing that, you're growing your business, you add more value to your business. So Olivia, let's go back a little bit to how in the heck did you get in this role of where you feel comfortable yourself, right, of achieving success? And let's go, if you may, all the way back to starting out what you were doing in college. So if you may, so next few minutes, give us kind of a summary of how you had these really different experiences, like how you got connected with Marcus, for example, right, in the NFL. So go into some of that, and I think it's a super interesting story.
So I'll go back a little farther for you. I was an athlete and training for the Junior Olympics in swimming until I was 9 years old. And I was diagnosed with a rare form of epilepsy at the time. It's actually the most common neurological disease in the world, but something, especially 20 years ago now, people didn't know nearly as much. They still don't know as much compared to other neurological diseases today. And so that really hindered my swimming ability and my progression in that. So I ended up having to stop swimming. And I think that was a moment in my time that I didn't realize that it would really change my thought process and projection moving forward. So I realized then at 9 years old I was a fighter, not a fighter. You're gonna give me the challenge and I'm gonna go, okay, now watch what I'm gonna do with it. You're telling me everything's stacked against me, but watch not only how I come out of it, but what I do with what I've learned and experienced with it. Fast forward, and I ended up doing some managing of men's sports in high school. I actually went back and started diving and became a coach for diving. I actually set the state record my high school year, and my senior year, I left diving as a coach and as an athlete at the top of my career, just setting a state record, coaching multiple kids to state championships, and I was managing four men's high school sports teams. So football, wrestling, lacrosse, and baseball, all 4 years of high school. So it really was a time where I knew what it meant to leave a sport due to injury or due to success and being at the top of your game and going, okay, now I've accomplished all these things. I'm going to walk away. I'm done. And also understanding as a student athlete, all the other work that went into it, right? As managing all these teams, it wasn't just about stats or setting up for a game or making sure all our equipment. It was mentally, are the guys doing well? In school, are the guys doing well? Where do they need help? Is there miscommunication in things? What to provide? So I ended up going to Quinnipiac University, where they saw my resume when I applied, saw that I was doing all these things, sent it over to the ice hockey program, and the individual who managed the managers, the assistant to all the coaches, reached out to say, would you like to manage both our D1 men and women's ice hockey programs? And I did. And during that time too, I really realized I didn't know where I wanted to be in sports. I didn't necessarily know the role, but I knew I wanted to be working within the sports industry. While managing and being in my undergrad, those hockey teams, I ended up working for the New York Giants. I went in between my sophomore and junior year. So I was very young going in. I was just as young, if not younger, than the rookies we get drafted. And was a very interesting experience because it was a time where not as many females were working in the league. I also have the dynamic of being way younger than a lot of the professionals, but I also had experiences up to that point where I very much understood sports, even though it might have not been football, but in a way that all of these guys have experienced. And I knew too what could potentially come down the line. Inevitably, we all have those moments of having to leave something. So how to prepare for it. That's also where I met Marcus, because I worked in professional sports for a team and managing athletes, because during that time I started managing athletes for 6 years. And I met amazing friends to this day, whether it's in the NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, you name it. I have lifelong friends that I keep in touch with, and some of which I still manage. And in 2019, I decided to go back to school because I wanted to know how all the pieces of an organization really fit together. I was doing that to some extent, not really the full extent. And I was like, you know what? Right now, I'm going to go back to school and see where this leads. I ended up doing a 2-year MBA program in 2 semesters. It was also when COVID hit, so it was perfect timing to complete my MBA. And I ended up working in supply chain, which I thought at the time was a great way. I was working at Lockheed Martin, overseeing the production of all the helicopters we make around the world. And I really got to work with every department that puts a helicopter together and learned a lot about the industry. But that feeling inside of me was not going away, of that completeness. Like I was fully where I was supposed to be. Again, I was the youngest on my teams, didn't have as much experience. So there were questions of like, why should you have a voice at this table? What do you bring? And this and that. And it was something that kept hitting me no matter my environment of, okay, why are these conversations still coming up? Why are people saying that what they thought a certain role was isn't, and their trajectory? During that time, I also went back and started teaching career development at my alma mater, Quinnipiac University. And those were things that were very important to me to put into the curriculum. Okay, let's talk about certain jobs and organizations and what it's like to work there, why you should get involved in professional organizations, certifications, like what are all these other things that we're not talking about? And that's how my book ended up being written and published, because a publishing team was seeing what I'd been doing in my journey and came to me to write my book. And then they were actually the ones who said to me when that released July 2022, have you thought about a podcast? Like all of your experiences, your journey. At this point now, I have a degree or certification in every business area. And they were like, you should really do a podcast. And from the idea of a podcast came not just the podcast, but the overarching business. And in March 2022, it was a moment of what am I going to do? Because the business was growing and thriving. But again, to what we were talking earlier of fear and my work ethic, I was like, I'm not going to give up my Lockheed Martin job. I like it. It wasn't totally fulfilling, but it was money in my pocket. I checked off all these other marks, benefits, 401k, right? All those things we all like. Unfortunately, though, in March, after the business had been running for a few months and everything, I was part of the Lockheed Martin mass layoffs. So it was that time where circumstance gave me an opportunity. I had a moment to, as soon as I found out on the first Tuesday in March, and they told me March 30th was going to be my last day. And so I started figuring things out. And I was getting a lot of offers because of different things I'd done. But again, the thought of fear and regret really started coming into my mind. And again, the business had already started to grow and lay the foundation, and the podcast was growing in so many different countries with so many different amazing stories and things we were doing. I said, am I going to look back 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 5 years from now, and go, why didn't I take the leap of faith? Is now the time? And so I decided at that point to not take any other offers that had been put on my desk. And I left corporate for good and dove full into my business. And that's a long story, kind of short, of why I got here and how I got here today.
There's so many different pieces to that, and frankly, that by itself could be a major podcast. Just talking about your life, how you got there, how you've overcome so many different things. I love it, and I think what I really do appreciate is obviously I'm sure there was real challenges like each of the steps that you talked about, but you found ways to overcome relatively quickly. You pivoted very quickly, overcame pain and challenges to get to the next step. And it also seems like you said yes a lot, through that process. That's often, we have this tendency to not to say yes because we get fearful, and often opportunities pass us by because we don't try. And I am a little bit curious, like how many hours you sleep a day, which I sometimes people question me as well. But it's awesome of like what you're doing, how many things you complete. So I'm curious, because of so much personal success that you've had yourself, and which allows you to have your own aspect, calling achieving success what you do. What are some habits that you consistently do on a regular basis to help make sure that you're performing at your best?
Ooh, that's a great question, and I love it because, like you said, it's the word habits. There isn't just one. You can't just rely on one. So one of the habits I do is being fully transparent with everyone around me. So family, friends, people I work with, partner with. If something's going on personally with me, I tell the people that have partnered with me or my clients what is going on. We'll use the mass layoff as an example. The day after I found out I was part of the mass layoffs, I actually did a podcast recording for my own show. And I knew at some point I was going to bring it up, because how can you talk about achieving success if you don't discuss like what you're going through yourself? And I thought that would be a cop out if I didn't just bring it up at some point. I didn't know when, I hadn't thought how. I was still in a fog from like finding out at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday that I was no longer going to have a job. And we went into the recordings, and a few minutes in, my guest is sharing a very vulnerable, authentic story. And it played into my journey of just being part of the mass layoffs. And I hadn't told anyone except my immediate family. And so I like sat there and I'm listening, and without thought, I totally understand that, because this is what just happened. And my production team who was on with me didn't even know yet. And so that transparency makes my clients feel like, okay, not only am I hiring her because she knows what she's talking about, but she's been there. She's gone through it. She can relate to where I am today, those feelings. And with family and friends on that part, it's okay. If I have work stuff going on, right? I was out last night and I started getting emails about being a guest on a podcast and someone who needed something, another host. And my phone just kept buzzing, my watch, because I have an Apple Watch, and I kept looking at it. And my boyfriend was like, is everything good? And I was like, listen, just give me 5 minutes to like concentrate on this. I'm sorry, I know you're in the middle of a story. Just give me 5 minutes so that this could stop, so I can be back and be fully present. The second piece of advice I give is be fully present. Life is always changing. It's always growing. We always have new success goals. But no matter how fast you move, or like once you get to that success goal, it's not going to be, okay, now we're done. Every day, and we don't know how our life can change tomorrow. Those moments are just as important as the success goal. That's how it shapes who we are, how we might look at that next goal. Those moments that we'll never be able to get back with family, with friends, and no matter what we're working on, as long as we're present, those are our memories. That's part of our legacy. And I think that's just as important. And then the third, again, kind of plays into both, is that importance of communication. Being there, being able to communicate what you need done, how you need done, or what's going on. Because at the end of the day, as long as we're doing that, then we can elevate. And I would say the fourth one, and then I'll be done, is really be okay with your decisions, right? We talked about fear throughout this. We've talked about success a lot. But I always say my number one rule to myself is twofold. Ask yourself the question, am I going to ever look back at this decision and possibly have regret? And if the answer is yes, then you need to dive into that some more. And the second fold is, am I going to be able to lay my head down on the pillow tonight and be okay with every decision, good, bad, or indifferent, that I've made today? And if the answer is yes, then keep pushing forward. If the answer is I'm going to start to have that regret or feel bad about how I talked to this person or this conversation, then pause for a second and regroup.
Great advice there, and I appreciate those all four key elements behind that. And along those lines, the last one you talked about, adding to it a bit, is when you go forward and you make a decision, is to do it full speed, right? Often we won't go all in, right? Because we have hesitation, we go through it. This is going way back there. I'm going back to like the original version of Karate Kid. Okay, so this is aging me a bit, right? But we used to watch this every football season with one of my coaches, and he would show us. It'd be the oddest thing. We'd be watching the Karate Kid as like part of our fall training camp, and it's like, why are we watching the Karate Kid? And he really wanted to go through. There was a part in the scene, the main character with Karate Kid, he goes, okay, you have two choices. You can go full speed or you go halfway and you get squished like a grape. And that was really the full premise. When you go full speed, you make a full decision yes, a full decision no, right? You're safe. But when you go half in, you get squished like a grape. And whenever you can avoid, right, that pain of not going all in is super valuable. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so Olivia, we know you have your own book that we encourage people to go and read and buy out there. What is a book you'd recommend that has inspired you that you would recommend for our audience?
So it's actually a book series, and it's the 7 Effective Habits. So they have it of leadership, they have it of business, they have it of a plethora of topics. I like it because it gives you takeaway actions. Like I said, my book, it always has things you could be implementing and those takeaways. I love that with books is when I'm looking to grow professionally, what are ways I can leave reading this that's going to challenge my mindset, help me look at different perspectives. So that series is one throughout high school, college, and now I've always enjoyed reading because it is something that can always spark a discussion too, especially if you're reading it in a group or talking about it.
Outstanding. All right, Olivia, finally, how can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
So you can connect with me on LinkedIn by searching Olivia Atkin or by searching Achieving Success LLC. We also have a company LinkedIn page that I respond to messages on both platforms myself. You can go to my website, achieving-success.com, or email me at olivia.atkin@achieving-success.com. I also answer all those messages myself as well. So it might take a few days, but you will, in fact, hear back from me.
Awesome. Olivia, thank you so much for being a guest on the Measure Success podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And to everyone who's listening, I encourage you to go out, follow, learn more about what Olivia is doing on a regular basis. And she is a very inspiring person. And so I'm sure you'll enjoy that. And as we always like to say to our guests, wishing you the very best and measuring your success. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Measure Success podcast. We'll see you again next time to learn from the best. Remember to subscribe now to get future episodes.